So if you want to rewrite, say, 18,000 years of global history, you probably think you need to start in, like, the sprawling wings of the Louvre, right?
Oh, yeah. Or some massive archive at the British Museum.
Exactly. But imagine you actually start with just a piece of domestic clay,
Just everyday clay.
right, in a small, regional, local lore museum in the Khmelnytsky Oblast of Ukraine, because that is exactly the journey you're going on with us today.
It really is. Welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah, today we are looking at how a very specific collection of regional artifacts is being used to build this massive, uninterrupted timeline of human identity.
And it's really pushing back hard against centuries of established imperial narrative.
Totally. Our source today is an audio presentation. It's titled The Trypillian Heritage of Millennia, Trypillia and Scythia as the Historical Foundation of Rus-Ukraine.
Which is quite the title.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's a sweeping, deeply passionate, and frankly, very politically charged historical thesis.
Right. And we really need to set some clear boundaries for you right at the top of this deep dive. Because the source material contains some highly charged rhetoric, specifically regarding the ongoing conflict between Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah, there's some really intense criticism directed at Muscovites and Russian historical narratives.
So we want to be super clear. Our mission here is not to endorse or validate those political viewpoints or, take a side in that conflict.
Right. We are just here to impartially unpack the fascinating cultural and historical arguments this creator is making.
Exactly. We're looking at the architecture of the argument they're building based on the artifacts they've examined.
And speaking of those artifacts, the setup for this whole argument starts at the Netishyn Local Lore Museum.
Yeah, it's such a humble starting point.
It really is. But from this one museum, the creator attempts to draw this unbroken line from the Stone Age directly to modern-day Ukraine.
Which is wild, because to build an 18,000-year timeline, you obviously have to start with physical evidence.
Right. The source doesn't start with kings and emperors. It starts with clay and symbols.
Yeah, the creator actually spends time praising the Netishyn Museum staff, like really thanking them for their helpfulness and their catalogs.
Because they're making this point that true historical wealth is usually found in local collections, not in grand, heavily curated national museums.
Exactly. It's in the local soil. And the first major artifact they highlight to show this continuity is the double vessel.
Oh, right, the double vessels.
Yeah, so these are very specific utilitarian ceramic pots. And the source points out that they originated in the ancient Trypillian culture.
Which is, what, thousands of years BCE?
Literally thousands of years ago. But the author shows how this exact same design survived in rural Ukrainian households all the way into the 19th century.
Wow. So same exact design for millennia.
Right. And then the creator focuses heavily on visual symbols, specifically this thing called the equal armed cross.
Now, when people hear cross, they immediately think Christianity, right?
Of course. But according to the source, this isn't a Christian symbol at all. They argue it's an ancient Vedic symbol of justice.
Yeah.
And they found it prominently displayed on Trypillian pottery.
So they're tracking this equal armed cross through time.
Yeah, the author claims this exact symbol was used by the Sumerians, the Scythians, the Sarmatians, and even the ancient Persians.
Wait, the Persians? How does that connect back to Ukraine?
Well, the source claims that the ancient Persian soldiers had this equal-armed cross on their shields.
All right.
And because the author traces Persian ancestral roots back to Sumerian migrations from Ukrainian lands...
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah. The source concludes that these Persians were essentially the first officially known crusaders because they carried this symbol of justice from the steppe.
Okay, I have to step in with some healthy skepticism here for you listening to consider.
Please do.
If a symbol is used in the same geographic spot over thousands and thousands of years, does it really mean the exact same thing the whole time?
It's a huge leap.
Right. Like, think about the Nike swoosh. It's just a modern corporate logo.
Yeah.
If someone finds a carved Nike swoosh in 2,000 years, are they going to know it meant athletic wear? Or are they just going to assume it's, I don't know, a universal religious symbol for a crescent moon?
That's a great analogy. It's incredibly hard to prove ideological continuity.
Exactly. Attributing a unified philosophy of justice to a simple geometric cross across a dozen different cultures seems like a stretch.
It is a stretch, but if we unpack the creator's intent here, whether the strict theological meaning shifted or not, They are using this visual continuity to build a case.
A case for what, exactly?
For an unbroken cultural DNA on this specific landmass.
Oh, boy.
Because they also trace these geometric meander patterns, like these continuous line designs, from the 18,000-year-old Mizin culture straight to classic Ukrainian embroidery, the Vyshyvanka.
So even if the religion changed, the visual language of the people living there didn't.
Exactly. And from visual symbols, the source then moves into the realm of intellect and statecraft.
Because if these ancient people shared all these complex symbols, they probably shared a complex society, right?
That's the argument. And the source aggressively pushes back against the traditional idea that the Scythians were just, unlettered nomads.
Right, the classic barbarian horseman stereotype.
Exactly. The creator points out that Greek historians actually recorded active diplomatic correspondence happening between the Scythians, the Greeks, and the Persians.
And you can't really manage complex international diplomacy without a written language.
You really can. So the source theorizes that the Scythians used a Proto-Cyrillic script.
Oh, wow. So they were literate.
Yes. And they also elevate these things called Tamgas. Have you heard of them?
Aren't Tamgas just those abstract signs, like localized clan markers or magic symbols?
That's how they are often dismissed, yeah, sort of like how Scandinavians supposedly used runes. But the author argues, no, these were sophisticated philosophical and heraldic crests.
Wait, like European heraldry, like coats of arms.
Exactly like that.
That is fascinating, because history really changes based on who is holding the pen. By elevating Tamgas to the level of heraldry, what is the author really doing here?
It is a totally deliberate strategy to dismantle the barbarian narrative.
Right.
By claiming literacy, complex diplomacy, and heraldry, the source is placing Scythian ancestors on equal footing with ancient Greece and Rome.
They weren't just the wild frontier. They were a peer superpower.
Exactly. The creator even reframes classical history to prove this. They bring up the massive Roman Gothic wars of the early centuries AD.
Okay, what about them?
According to Greek sources cited by the author, these were actually Scythian wars.
Wait, really? The Goths were just the front.
Yeah, the author argues the Goths were only able to challenge Rome because they had Scythian cover and Scythian alliances backing them up.
That completely shifts the balance of power on the map. And this elevation of these ancient societies builds directly into the creator's central thesis. Right.
It does. It's all leading to the justification and defense of the term Rus-Ukraine.
Which is a very debated term. So how does the source address the critics who constantly ask, well, where is Rus-Ukraine mentioned in the ancient chronicles?
The creator explains it's a composite term. It's meant to describe a continuous historical entity.
Okay, kind of like a dual name.
Yeah, they draw a comparison to Persia and Iran.
Oh, right. Two names, same continuous history.
Exactly. So the author lists all these evolving names, both endonyms they call themselves and exonyms others called them.
Let me guess, it's a long list.
It is Cimmerians, Scythians, Roxolani, Aorsi, Sarmatians, Rosans, Cossacks, and finally Ukrainians.
So they're arguing it's not a bunch of different groups replacing each other. It's the same people just getting relabeled by external historians.
Spot on. And to prove they were always engaging in high-level statecraft, the source brings in the Ostrogsky family.
Ah, from Volhynia.
Yes, describing them as the uncrowned kings of Rus-Ukraine.
I see.
And the author asserts that Ukrainian ancestors, like the Gediminids, actually held a 15th century Congress of European monarchs. Yeah, they frame it as basically a structural prototype for the European Union.
That is a bold claim, but not nearly as bold as what they say about Rurik.
Oh, the Rurik claim is massive.
Yeah, I have to stop here to marvel at this, because for you listening, I really want you to consider how massively this shifts the geographical center of gravity of Eastern European history.
It really does. It moves everything strictly southward.
Right, because the traditional narrative is always that Rurik came from the distant north, right,
Yeah.
like Scandinavia. And he founded Novgorod way up near the Baltic.
That's the standard imperial narrative. But the source completely re-examines this.
And what do they claim?
They claim Rurik actually came from the island of Rügen, which ties more to the Baltic Slavs, and crucially that he ruled from Novgorod-Seversky.
Which is located on the Desna River, that is deep inside the modern borders of Ukraine.
Exactly. And they cross-reference this with the Byzantine Emperor Constantine Porphyrogenitus, who referred to Rurik's stronghold as Nemogard.
So by relocating the founding of the dynasty to the south, they just sever the whole imported from the north myth.
That's the entire goal. The author is using All these historical figures from ancient Scythian philosophers like Anacharsis all the way to Rurik and later Danilo Romanovich.
Who was crowned king of Rus by the Pope, right?
Right, to prove that statehood and royalty were always native to this land. It wasn't imported from the north, and it wasn't a gift from the east.
It was indigenous. And this brings us to the present day, right? Because for the author, this whole deep dive into ancient history isn't just an academic exercise.
No, not at all. It has immediate, profound, real-world consequences right now.
And again, just to remind you, we are keeping our commitment to impartiality here as we examine the source's highly critical views on modern geopolitics.
Yes. So the source contrasts the Netishyn Museum with the Moscow Historical Museum.
Okay, setting up a bit of a museum war.
Exactly. The creator claims that Moscow's museum is largely an artificial collection, that they had to take artifacts from places like Odessa and Caucasia to construct a fabricated imperial history.
Reverse engineering an identity by pulling from the margins.
Right. Whereas Netishyn, the author argues, holds authentic, local proof of continuous culture pulled straight from its own soil.
The creator even mocks certain modern Russian historical movements, right?
Yeah, specifically ones that embrace alternative history titles like Great Tartaria.
Oh, I've seen that online.
The author argues that embracing Great Tartaria shows a desperate need for a grand identity, completely regardless of historical accuracy.
And that ties directly into the ultimate conclusion of the source regarding the current war.
It does. The author's ultimate thesis is that the current invasion happened because the leadership operated on a massive illusion.
The illusion that Ukrainians didn't know their own history.
Exactly. The author argues that historical knowledge isn't just, trivia for a test. It is the fundamental armor of a state.
So historical self-awareness functions basically as national defense.
Yes.
That is such an interesting concept. It's like a person knowing their own worth so deeply that bullies don't even bother trying to tear them down.
That's a really good way to put it. The author believes that if the population universally and deeply knew their 18,000-year history, the illusion of a weak identity would never have existed to draw an invasion in the first place.
It acts like a societal immune system. It immediately recognizes a foreign imperial narrative and rejects it.
Precisely. And that really wraps up the author's overarching worldview. History is a living, breathing entity.
Yeah, they really bring that home at the end, don't they?
They do. While talking about the Netishyn Museum, the author notes that sitting right there near the ancient stone tools and Trypillian pottery is a modern protective suit, flak jackets.
Wow.
And to the creator, that isn't weird or out of place. It represents the exact same ongoing struggle to protect a singular, unbroken cultural lineage.
The pottery proves you were there, and the body armor proves you aren't leaving. Well, we have covered an incredible scope in today's deep dive.
Yeah.
I mean, we started with clay, double vessels, and embroidered crosses in a small regional museum.
And we ended up traversing 18,000 years.
Right. Through Scythian literacy, Tamgas acting as heraldry, shifting the true location of Rurik's stronghold south, all the way to the idea that knowing your history is the ultimate shield against modern warfare.
It's a lot to process, but the so what here is really important.
Yeah, why does this matter to you listening?
Because regardless of your political stance, this source is an absolute masterclass in how ancient history is actively used today. It's used to define modern identity and justify a nation's right to exist on the world stage.
History is never just in the past.
Yeah.
Which leaves us with a final, slightly provocative thought for you to mull over on your own.
Oh, I love this part.
So, early in the presentation, the author traces the spirit of this entire civilization through a really everyday object called the Didukh.
Right, the traditional wheat sheaf.
Yeah, it's brought indoors during winter to represent ancestral spirits. It's such an ordinary agrarian thing, but it proves cultural survival. So I want you to look around the room you are in right now. Just look at the mundane objects around you. If an archaeologist, say 5,000 years from now, wanted to prove that your unique culture, your specific worldview, survived an era of massive upheaval, what completely ordinary object in your home would they put behind museum glass to tell your unbroken story?